Season 2, Vampire's Descent. Chapter 1, Awakening the Dark. The night had always been Eva's sanctuary, but now it felt different. Darker. More suffocating. Since the moment she embraced the curse of immortality, everything about her world had changed. The hunger was constant, gnawing at her from within, an insatiable thirst that no amount of blood could ever fully quench. But it wasn't just the thirst that troubled her, it was the power, the sheer weight of it, pulsing beneath her skin, an energy so raw and uncontrollable that it terrified her. She stood at the edge of the balcony, staring out over the moonlit city below. The world seemed peaceful, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. Luca, standing behind her, had become her anchor. His presence, once a comfort, now seemed more like a tether, holding her to the remnants of her humanity. He wasn't just her love anymore, he was her lifeline. "I don't feel like myself," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the night's breeze. Luca stepped closer, his hand brushing against her shoulder. "You're not the person you were, Eva. You're something more now." His voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, a note of concern that he couldn't hide. Eva closed her eyes, trying to focus on the feeling of his touch, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Not the warmth of Luca's embrace, not the familiarity of the world she once knew. The vampire blood running through her veins was changing her, warping her, and she could feel it every moment of every day. The vampire world was calling her, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to answer. "It's not just the blood, Luca," she said, turning to face him. "It's the power. I can feel it inside me, all the time. The hunger, the darkness, it's all so much stronger now. I don't know how to control it." Luca's eyes darkened, a flicker of worry crossing his face. "You don't have to control it alone. We'll figure this out together. I won't let you fall into the darkness." But Eva wasn't so sure. It felt as if the darkness had already claimed a part of her, slowly twisting her from the inside out. She could hear it whispering to her when the silence grew too loud, promises of power, of freedom, of an end to her fear. All she had to do was give in. But she couldn't. Not yet. She turned away from Luca, walking further into the room. The walls seemed to close in on her as her senses heightened. The sharp scent of blood from the nearby street, the distant hum of human life, even the subtle pulse of Luca's heartbeat, it all felt like a cacophony, a noise that she couldn't escape. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice shaking. "It's like I'm not even human anymore. I don't know who I am." Luca followed her, his steps slow but determined. "You're still you, Eva. You're still the woman I love. You've just been changed, but that doesn't mean you've lost yourself." But Eva wasn't sure anymore. The truth was, the more she tried to hold on to the woman she once was, the more that version of herself seemed to slip away, like sand through her fingers. The vampire within her was growing stronger, and it wanted to take control. There were flashes of her past, of the girl she once was, but they felt distant, almost like memories of someone else. Eva reached out, gripping the edge of the table in front of her, trying to steady herself. But the world around her seemed to be spinning. She felt dizzy, disoriented, as her body reacted to the power within her. "You're not in control of it, yet," Luca said softly, as if reading her mind. "But you will be. I know you will. We'll find a way." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I want to control it, Luca. What if I'm supposed to embrace it?" Luca's eyes widened, his expression one of shock and concern. "No. You're not a monster, Eva. Don't let the blood control you." But Eva's heart beat faster, her fangs now visible at the edges of her mouth as the hunger rose again. The temptation to feed, to surrender to the power surging through her, was overwhelming. She could feel it calling to her, urging her to give in, to taste the blood, to let the darkness consume her. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, and it was just Eva standing at the precipice of something far darker than she had ever imagined. The vampire world was pulling her in, and she was terrified of what might happen if she let go. But Luca's voice broke through the storm in her mind. Eva, don't. I'm right here. You're not alone. With a shaky breath, Eva turned back to face him, the vampire instincts within her beginning to recede. She had to fight this. She had to fight herself. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, she whispered. Luca took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. You're stronger than you think. We'll figure this out together. But you have to trust me. And you have to trust yourself. For the first time since her transformation, Eva nodded. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but she had no other choice. The darkness inside her wasn't going to go away. The only thing she could do now was fight to control it, no matter how hard it became. As the night deepened, Eva and Luca stood together, the weight of their new reality hanging over them. The vampire world was closing in, and the danger they faced was only just beginning. But for now, they would face it together. Chapter 2, The Prophecy Unfolds. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows on the ancient stone walls of the mansion. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Eva paced back and forth, her mind racing. The change within her was deeper than just the transformation into a vampire. Something ancient was awakening, stirring within the very core of her being. It felt as though the bloodline she had inherited was speaking to her, urging her to understand its full potential. Luca sat across the room, watching her, his eyes dark with concern. He could sense the distance between them growing. She wasn't the same woman he had met, a fiery, passionate soul, brimming with life. Now, there was something colder, more calculating, buried beneath her gaze. It frightened him, though he would never show it. He loved her, but he couldn't deny that this new power was changing her in ways neither of them had anticipated. Eva, he called softly, his voice breaking through the swirl of her thoughts. We need to talk. Eva paused but didn't turn to face him immediately. Her heart ached, but she didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to reach out to him, to hold on to what they had before everything fell apart. But the pull of her new powers, the darkness within her, made it difficult to connect with him the way she once had. I know, she replied, her voice strained. I feel it too, Luca. Something's happening to me. I can't stop it. Luca stood up, crossing the room to where she was standing. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away before he could touch her. His heart clenched, but he refused to show his pain. He had to be strong for her, even when she was pushing him away. We knew this would be hard, Luca said, his voice steady. But we'll figure it out. We always do. Eva's laugh was soft but bitter. You don't understand, Luca. This isn't just about me anymore. This is bigger than us. He stepped back, his brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? Eva's eyes darkened, and she began to speak as though her mind were elsewhere, lost in the visions that had been haunting her for days. I've been having dreams. Visions. Of an ancient vampire queen and of power, immense power, coursing through her veins. And in those dreams, there's always a prophecy. A prophecy that says that the one who possesses the Crimson Heart will either rise to rule the vampire world, or fall into darkness. Luca's breath caught in his throat. The Crimson Heart. He had heard whispers of such a legend in his past, tales told in hushed voices among the oldest and most powerful vampires. It was said that the Crimson Heart would be the one to either unite the vampire clans or destroy them. It was the ultimate power, capable of both great destruction and unimaginable control. Are you saying that the prophecy is about you? Luca's voice was low, laced with disbelief and fear. Eva nodded, her expression distant. I don't know. But every time I close my eyes, I see the same vision. The Crimson Heart, it's connected to my bloodline, Luca. I'm tied to it. And if I can't control what's inside me, I will become the very thing I fear. Luca moved closer, his hand reaching for hers again, this time not letting her pull away. You're not alone in this, Eva. We'll face it together. But Eva shook her head, her eyes filled with something darker. I can feel the power growing inside me. The darkness, it whispers to me. It promises me everything I've ever wanted. Control. Power. The ability to make them all bow at my feet. I don't know if I can resist it, Luca. Luca's heart sank, his grip tightening on her hand. But you don't want that, Eva. You're not that person. You're not a monster. The words were meant to comfort her, but they didn't reach her. Eva stepped back, breaking their connection. Her eyes were no longer just filled with fear, they were cold, calculating, as though something deep inside her was making its presence known. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered, more to herself than to Luca. All I know is that the prophecy is real, and I'm a part of it. This bloodline is ancient, Luca. I can feel it. It's connected to rulers of old, vampires who have long since vanished from history. And somehow, I'm tied to them. Luca's mind raced. He knew the history of the vampire world, the old bloodlines that had once ruled with absolute power. But he had always believed those days were long gone, lost to time. Now, hearing Eva speak of it so matter-of-factly, he realized how little he truly understood about the depths of her transformation. He reached out for her again, but she stepped back, her eyes sharp with uncertainty. We need to figure this out. I need to understand what I'm meant to do. If I embrace the power that the prophecy speaks of, I could be unstoppable. I could destroy anyone who stands in my way. But if I fail, I'll fall into darkness. I'll become a monster. And I'll lose everything. Everything I've ever loved. Luca's heart clenched. He could see the battle raging inside her, between the woman he loved and the darkness that threatened to consume her. He couldn't lose her, but he also knew he couldn't stop her from facing this alone. This was something she had to confront on her own, even if it meant she might have to embrace something darker than either of them could ever understand. There has to be another way, Luca said, his voice rough with emotion. I can't stand the thought of losing you to this prophecy. Eva looked at him, her expression filled with both love and sorrow. I don't want to lose you either, Luca. But the prophecy, it's not something we can outrun. It's already started. The question now is whether I can control it, or if it will control me. As they stood in the heavy silence that followed, the weight of Eva's words hung between them. The prophecy was no longer just a myth or a distant legend, it was real, and it was pulling Eva deeper into the vampire world, where power, betrayal, and darkness ruled. Luca knew that this was only the beginning. Chapter 3, Bloodlines and Betrayal. The mansion was silent, save for the soft rustling of curtains as the wind swept through the open windows. Eva sat in the study, a room once filled with warmth and comfort, now cold and distant. Books lined the shelves, ancient tomes about vampire history and lore. But as Eva's eyes scanned the pages, none of the knowledge within seemed to bring her any peace. The secrets of the past felt more like chains, binding her to something she couldn't escape. She turned the pages of an old manuscript, but the words blurred before her eyes. It was no use. The more she read, the more she understood that her lineage was a tangled web, one that reached back centuries. The truth about her bloodline, about the Crimson Heart, was far more complex than she had ever imagined. Her fingers brushed over the intricate symbols etched into the manuscript, symbols that were so ancient they were barely legible. The more she studied, the more it became clear that her family was no ordinary vampire lineage. They were tied to something far more powerful, something that had ruled the vampire world before the modern age. The ancient rulers. The forgotten vampire queens and kings. Her ancestors had not just been powerful, they had been rulers of the vampire world, their bloodline controlling everything from the dark, hidden corners of the vampire courts to the very foundation of vampire society. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. She wasn't just some random vampire, she was the heir to a throne that had been long lost to time. The weight of that knowledge made her stomach twist. Eva. Luca's voice called softly from the doorway, pulling her out of her thoughts. She looked up, and there he was, standing in the threshold, his gaze heavy with concern. He could see the distress in her eyes, the confusion, the uncertainty. He'd always known she was special, but this was something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping into the room. Eva shook her head, standing up and pacing once more. Her mind raced with the implications of her discovery. The prophecy. The ancient bloodlines. The connections between the rulers of old and her bloodline. Everything was connected, and it wasn't just about her powers. It was about legacy, about destiny. "I'm not okay," she admitted, her voice tight. "Luca. I've been looking through these books. I didn't know, no one ever told me, what I was really a part of. My bloodline goes back to the ancient vampire queens, the ones who ruled before everything fractured. Before the vampire clans split into factions. My ancestors weren't just royalty, they were gods among vampires." Luca's face hardened, and he stepped forward. "What are you saying, Eva? You're telling me you're the heir to the vampire throne?" Eva nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "Yes. But it's not just a throne. It's power, Luca. Unimaginable power. And that power is inside me." A chill ran through Luca at the thought. He had always known Eva was special, but this was different. This wasn't just about a woman he loved, this was about a force far beyond his understanding. He reached for her, taking her hands in his. "Eva, you can't let this control you. You can't let this bloodline, this legacy, consume you. You're still you. You're not your ancestors. You don't have to follow their path." Eva pulled her hands away, her eyes flashing with the glint of something darker. "How can I not? How can I ignore the power that's awakening inside me? You don't understand, Luca. This isn't just about blood, it's about who I'm meant to be. The prophecy says that whoever holds the Crimson Heart will either rise to rule or fall into darkness. I am the Crimson Heart, Luca. And if I don't accept my destiny, I risk everything, including you." Luca's breath caught in his throat. "You're not a monster, Eva. You don't have to become one just because you have this power." But the words felt hollow, even to him. He could see the transformation happening before his eyes. Eva was changing, and not just on the outside. The person she had been, strong, confident, a force of nature, was being replaced by someone he barely recognized. The woman he loved was slipping away, and he had no idea how to stop it. As Eva turned back to the books, Luca felt a deep sense of foreboding. He knew they had only scratched the surface of what was happening. The bloodline, the prophecy, it was all part of something much bigger than they could comprehend. He took a deep breath, pushing his doubts aside. "You're right. I don't understand everything, but I know one thing. I'm not going to let you face this alone." Eva paused, glancing over her shoulder. "You don't have a choice, Luca. I'm already too deep into it. I can feel it, this power. It's calling me. And I think I'm starting to want it. Luca's heart sank. Want it? The darkness. The power that could consume her and turn her into something unrecognizable. I can't lose you to this, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. We need to stop this, Eva. We need to find a way to stop the prophecy from coming true. But Eva wasn't listening. She had already moved away from him, her focus now entirely on the ancient manuscript. Her fingers hovered over the pages, tracing the symbols with an almost reverent touch. As if the words themselves held the key to her future. I've been searching for answers, she murmured. I thought the prophecy was just some old legend, but now I know it's true. The Crimson Heart. It's me. And if I can't control it, she trailed off, her voice quiet but filled with dread. I will fall into darkness. And when that happens, no one will be able to stop me. Luca stepped closer, his eyes softening as he reached for her again. You're not a monster, Eva. Please, you have to believe that. For a long moment, Eva was silent, her gaze fixed on the manuscript as though it held the answers to everything she needed. Finally, she looked up at Luca, her eyes heavy with regret and uncertainty. I don't know what to do anymore, Luca, she whispered. I'm not sure I can resist it. The darkness is too strong. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the doorway. A voice that neither Eva nor Luca had expected to hear. You won't have to resist it, Eva. Because soon, you'll embrace it. Luca spun around, his heart racing. Standing in the doorway was a figure he had hoped never to see again, one who had once been an ally, but now was nothing more than a shadow of betrayal. Vera, Luca spat, his voice cold. Eva turned toward the intruder, her expression unreadable. Vera was an ancient vampire, someone from Luca's past who had once been part of their inner circle. But now, it was clear that she had her own agenda, and it did not involve helping Eva. I've been watching you, Eva, Vera continued, stepping forward with a sly smile. And I have to admit, I'm impressed. You've come a long way. But there's more waiting for you than you realize. That bloodline of yours. It's the key to the vampire throne. And I'm here to help you claim it. Luca stepped in front of Eva, his eyes narrowing. You're not helping anyone. You've always been about power, Vera. And that's all you want now. Vera laughed softly, her eyes glittering with malice. You think you can protect her, Luca? You think you can stop what's already been set in motion? You're too late. Eva's destiny has already been decided. Eva felt a chill creep up her spine. She had always known there were dangerous factions within the vampire world, but to hear Vera speak with such confidence. It was clear now that Eva wasn't just a pawn in some ancient prophecy. She was the prize, the key to a much larger, more deadly game. I'm not here to fight you, Vera said, her smile widening. I'm here to offer you a choice, Eva. Join me. Embrace the darkness within you. Together, we can rule the vampire world. Luca's face darkened with fury. You're trying to manipulate her, Vera. This isn't about power. It's about control. Vera's eyes flicked to Luca, dismissive. Control. No, Luca. This is about destiny. And I think Eva knows that now. Eva's heart raced as she stared at Vera. The woman's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she felt a strange pull toward the darkness. Was this really her destiny? To embrace the very power that could change everything? As the tension in the room thickened, Eva realized that the choice before her wasn't just about her bloodline. It was about who she was going to become. And that choice would change everything. Chapter 4: The Rise of the Hunters. The night air was colder than usual, a biting chill that swept through the mansion's tall windows. Eva stood on the balcony, gazing out at the city below, where the streets were veiled in darkness. The cool wind ruffled her hair, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside her. She had always known the vampire world wasn't a safe place, but now, the dangers were closing in on her faster than she could prepare. Luca's footsteps were quiet as he approached, but she knew he was there. He always was. "Eva," Luca said softly, his voice carrying a weight of concern she couldn't ignore. "We need to talk." Turning to face him, Eva saw the tension in his eyes, the same tension that had plagued him for days. The human vampire hunters were coming. She could feel their presence lurking just beyond the horizon, like a storm gathering strength. "What is it now?" Eva asked, her tone a mix of exhaustion and frustration. The darkness within her was growing, and it wasn't just her power, it was a shadow that clung to her soul, whispering temptations, reminding her of what she could become. "They're getting closer," Luca said. "The hunters. They've already learned about your bloodline." Eva's heart skipped a beat. It was inevitable, she knew that. Her bloodline was more than just a gift, it was a curse. A powerful one. And now, the hunters were closing in. They were relentless, tracking her like prey, their obsession growing with each passing day. She had always felt the pull of something ancient, something beyond her control, but she never imagined it would drag hunters into her life. "They know what I am now," Eva said, her voice strained. "They'll stop at nothing to destroy me." Luca stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, grounding her. "Not if I can stop them." But there was doubt in his voice, doubt Eva couldn't ignore. She had always trusted Luca to protect her, but now the threat was bigger than either of them could have imagined. The hunters weren't just ordinary humans, they were trained, armed, and deadly, and they had something else on their side, knowledge. They knew about her bloodline. They knew what she was capable of. And worse, they had someone who had once been close to Luca, someone who had now become an enemy. "They've got someone working with them, don't they?" Eva asked, the suspicion in her voice sharp. She could see the hesitation in Luca's eyes. "Someone from your past." Luca's expression hardened. "Yes. Someone I thought was dead." Eva's breath caught in her throat. The implications of that were terrifying. If someone from Luca's past had returned to hunt her, it meant they were more than just skilled hunters. They had history, a deep knowledge of Luca's weaknesses, and they were using it against him, and against her. "Who is it?" Eva asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Adrian," Luca muttered, his eyes darkening. "He was my closest friend. We were part of the same faction once, before everything fell apart. But something changed. He betrayed me. And now, he's working with the hunters. He's the one leading them." Eva's heart sank. Adrian. The name felt like a knife to her chest. Betrayal, betrayal, betrayal. It was all she had known since stepping into this world, and now, it seemed even Luca's past was filled with enemies. She looked at Luca, her mind racing. Why would he do this? Why would someone who was once your friend help them hunt us? Luca's expression was haunted. "I don't know. I wish I had answers, Eva, but he's no longer the man I knew. He's changed, twisted by something darker." Eva felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. She had no doubt that the darkness was creeping into every part of their lives. The vampire world was a tangled web of deceit, and with the hunters closing in, there was no telling who could be trusted anymore. "We need to get out of here," Eva said, her voice suddenly urgent. She had trained for this, but she wasn't ready. Not yet. She wasn't strong enough. Not to face Adrian, not to face the hunters, not to face what was awakening inside her. "We're not running from this," Luca said firmly, his jaw clenched. "We can't keep running forever, Eva. This is our fight. I'll protect you. Eva shook her head, her eyes burning with intensity. You can't protect me from myself, Luca. You know what I am becoming. And the hunters, Adrian, won't stop until they have me. I can't let you die because of me. Luca's expression softened, and he stepped closer. I'm not going anywhere without you. You're not alone in this. Eva reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. The connection between them was a lifeline, something she didn't know if she could hold on to in the coming storm. I'm scared, Luca. I don't know how much longer I can fight this darkness. Every day, it gets harder to hold it back. The power, the anger, it's all too much. Luca's eyes softened with tenderness, and for a moment, the weight of their situation seemed to fade. We'll get through this. Together. No matter what. But deep down, Eva knew they were running out of time. The hunters were closing in. The battle between light and darkness was about to begin in earnest. Training begins. That night, Eva's training intensified. She had always been strong, but now she felt the pull of her bloodline more than ever. Her powers surged within her, both terrifying and intoxicating. She could feel the strength in her veins, the same strength that had made her ancestors legendary. Her training was no longer about learning control. It was about survival. Every time she sparred with Luca, every time she pushed herself to the brink, she could feel the darkness creeping in. It wasn't just the power, her emotions were unpredictable, erratic. One moment, she felt like the woman she once was, and the next, she was consumed by the urge to lash out, to hurt, to destroy. You're stronger than you think, Luca said during one of their sparring sessions. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his concern. He had seen the changes in her, too. The hunger. The bloodlust. Eva's breath was shallow, her fists clenched as she tried to focus. But it was hard to keep her mind clear. The darkness inside her was always there, a presence waiting to overtake her. I don't know how much longer I can keep it in check. Luca moved to her side, his hand brushing her arm. You're not alone, Eva. You never will be. We'll find a way to beat this. Together. But the truth was, Luca didn't know how much longer they had. The hunters were out there, and Adrian's shadow loomed large over them. And each day, Eva's struggle to remain human became more difficult. The first encounter. Days later, their worst fear came true. The hunters had found them. Luca and Eva were walking through the garden, the moonlight casting long shadows on the ground, when they sensed it, an unmistakable presence, closing in on them. Eva's heart skipped a beat. They're here, she whispered, the realization sending a chill down her spine. The hunt had begun. Suddenly, the world seemed to go silent, as if time itself had frozen. From the darkness emerged figures, silhouettes cloaked in black, moving with deadly precision. They had found them. And at the forefront of the group was Adrian. His eyes were cold, calculating, filled with a darkness that made Eva's stomach churn. He was no longer the friend she had imagined him to be. Luca, Adrian called out, his voice harsh. It's been a long time. But now, the game is over. Chapter 5, Shadows of the Past. The moonlight bathed the mansion in an ethereal glow, but the peace of the night was far from Eva's mind. She sat alone in her room, her fingers tracing the delicate veins of her wrist, feeling the pulse beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the ancient power that had awakened within her. It was both a gift and a curse, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to control. Her connection to her bloodline had deepened over the past few weeks. Every night, her dreams were filled with cryptic images, flashes of ancient vampires, regal figures bathed in blood-red light. The visions were disorienting, and at times, terrifying. But they were also enlightening. They were a glimpse into the past, a history she had never been told. One night, as Eva lay on the bed, her eyes closed but sleep far from her reach, another vision seized her. She was plunged into a world she could not recognize. The air was thick with smoke, and the scent of burning flesh filled her nose. She stood in the midst of a blood-soaked battlefield, the ground beneath her feet trembling with the weight of thousands of bodies. The sky above was stained crimson, as if the very heavens mourned the carnage below. In the distance, towering figures in dark cloaks stood over a throne, their eyes burning with a cold, calculating power. Eva recognized the faces from old vampire legends, figures that had long since disappeared from history, vampire kings and queens who had once ruled the world. But there was something strange about the scene. Among the ancient rulers, one face stood out, someone she recognized. It was Luca. He was younger, his features sharper, but unmistakably him. He stood beside a woman with a striking resemblance to Eva, her ancestor, perhaps, but the power in her eyes was far more sinister. This was not the woman Eva had been taught about in her history books. No, this woman was ruthless, commanding, a queen who had once ruled with absolute authority. Luca's eyes met Eva's in the vision, and for a moment, she felt his gaze pierce through her as if he could see her. His expression was one of guilt, regret, and something else she couldn't quite understand. Before she could speak, the vision shattered like glass, and Eva was thrust back into the cold reality of her room. Her breath was ragged, her body drenched in sweat. What had she just witnessed? The images, the feeling of Luca being involved in that history, it shook her to her core. But the most disturbing part was the sensation that she wasn't just a passive observer. She had been there. Somehow, her soul was tethered to this dark history. Eva stood shakily, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of the vision, but all it did was raise more questions. She needed answers, and the only person who could give them to her was Luca. Confrontation with Luca. Later that night, after hours of pacing and reflecting on the vision, Eva found Luca sitting by the fireplace in the grand hall, his posture tense and his expression distant. He looked up as she approached, his eyes softening when he saw the troubled look on her face. "Eva?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't keep the vision to herself. It felt too important, too real. She needed to confront him, even if the truth would destroy everything between them. "You weren't just a vampire once, were you?" she asked, her voice quivering with a mixture of pain and confusion. You were part of something else. Something much older. Something connected to me." Luca's face hardened, and for a moment, Eva saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, a fear that didn't belong to the man she had known. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tight. Eva felt the weight of his silence. "I saw it, Luca. The vision. The battle. The throne. You were there, with them. With my family. And you?" she paused, struggling to find the words. "You were one of them. You were part of it. Part of my bloodline." Luca's eyes darted away, unable to meet her gaze. Eva could feel the heaviness in the room grow thicker as the truth she had feared began to surface. He stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "It's not what you think, Eva," he said, his voice strained. "You don't understand." But Eva wasn't going to back down. "Tell me then, Luca. Tell me what I saw. Because I saw you, and I saw her, the woman who looked like me." "Who was she?" Luca's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. "Her name was Seraphine. She was your ancestor, and she was the queen of the vampires, my queen. I served her once. I was bound to her." Eva felt the world shift beneath her feet. The pieces were falling into place, but the truth was far more complicated than she had imagined. "What do you mean, bound to her?" she asked, her voice trembling. Luca exhaled sharply, as though the weight of his past was a burden he could no longer carry. "I wasn't always the man I am now, Eva. I wasn't always your protector. Once, I was a soldier, a loyal servant to the Queen. I fought in wars that shaped the world of vampires. And Seraphine, she was more than just a queen to me. She was my master. I was bound to her by blood, by loyalty, by something far darker than you could ever understand." Eva's heart raced. "But, what happened? Why did you leave?" Luca's gaze darkened further, his eyes filled with a pain that Eva had never seen before. She was consumed by her power. She became cruel, manipulative, obsessed with control. And eventually, I realized that the queen I had once loved was lost to the darkness. I couldn't serve her anymore. I couldn't watch her destroy everything. So I broke free. Broke free. Eva whispered. "You betrayed her." Luca's eyes were cold now, the weight of years of regret heavy in his voice. "Yes. And I paid the price. She hunted me for centuries, wanting me back under her control. And when I met you, when I saw you for the first time, I thought, maybe I could escape it all. Maybe I could leave the past behind me." Eva stood still, the shock of the revelation settling deep within her. Luca wasn't just a vampire, he had been a part of the very family that she had once thought of as her ancestors' legacy. The bloodline she had inherited wasn't just her own, it was his too. And it had a darker history than she could have ever imagined. But what did this mean for them now? Could she trust him, knowing that he had once served the very family she had been born into? Could they ever be the same? "I never wanted you to know," Luca continued, his voice quiet now, tinged with sorrow. "I wanted to protect you from all of this. From the darkness of my past. I thought I could leave it behind, but it's never really gone. And now, you're a part of it too." Eva felt a knot form in her chest. The past they had shared together, their love, their bond, everything was now clouded by the truth of his history with her bloodline. The weight of it felt unbearable. Luca reached for her hand, his grip firm yet desperate. "Eva, I swear to you, I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I've always loved you. And I would never let anything happen to you." Eva closed her eyes, trying to absorb the truth. "But how can we move forward, Luca? How can we trust each other when the very thing that binds us together is built on lies?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of their intertwined fates. Both of them were part of the same darkness, but in different ways. And now, they were forced to confront it. Eva knew that the road ahead would be harder than she ever imagined. The past had caught up with them. And the shadows of those who had come before them would haunt their future. Chapter 6: The Vampire Wars. The night was thick with tension as Eva stood before the great hall's towering windows, gazing out into the dark abyss of the vampire city below. A heavy, uneasy stillness hung in the air, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. The world was changing, she was changing, and everything around her was shifting with it. Eva could feel it, the weight of the ancient prophecies pressing down on her shoulders. It was no longer just about survival, about controlling the darkness that lurked inside her, it was about something far larger. The vampire world, a world that had been hidden from human eyes for centuries, was beginning to take notice. And with that attention, the politics of an ancient and brutal empire were now at play. Eva had always been a part of something greater, but she had never truly understood how deeply entwined her fate was with the future of the vampire race. Now, that future was within her reach. Or, perhaps, it was already a part of her. Luca, who had been her protector, her love, now found himself caught in the same whirlwind of power. The person who had once been a soldier under the iron fist rule of the ancient queens, now found himself bound to a woman who was destined to either lead the vampire world into a new era, or plunge it into destruction. Their love had once seemed like the thing that would carry them through it all. But now, it seemed like the very thing that might tear them apart. A desperate alliance. Luca had tried to shield Eva from the undercurrents of vampire politics, from the factions that would stop at nothing to claim power. He had hoped that, in time, they could escape this world and live a life free of its ancient wars. But that hope had been shattered the moment the vampire elders learned of Eva's lineage. The door to the study creaked open, and Victor, an ancient vampire and one of Luca's oldest allies, stepped into the room. His appearance was startlingly youthful, though his eyes held centuries of wisdom and darkness. His face was a mask of solemnity, and Eva could feel his presence like an oppressive weight in the air. "You've been summoned," Victor said, his voice low and commanding. "By the Council of Elders." Eva's stomach twisted. The Council of Elders was the ruling body of the vampire world, an assembly of ancient vampires who controlled the vast majority of the vampire factions. For centuries, they had ruled with absolute power. Now, they were looking at her, not as an ally, but as a potential weapon to be wielded. "We have no choice but to face them," Victor continued. "The factions are already moving, Eva. Some see you as their future queen. Others see you as a threat to be eliminated." "Why now?" Eva asked, her voice trembling. "Why me?" Victor's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Because you are the last of the royal bloodline. And your powers, they are unprecedented. Some of the oldest vampires believe that if they control you, they will control the entire vampire kingdom. Others want to kill you before you can become what they fear most." Eva turned her gaze to Luca, who had been standing silently by the fireplace. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of worry. "Luca, you can't be serious," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "You want me to go before the council? You know what they're capable of. You know what they'll do to me." Luca crossed the room in a few long strides, his hand reaching for hers. "We don't have a choice. If we refuse, the factions will tear us apart, and everything we've fought for will be lost. We need to find a way to control the situation before it controls us." Eva looked down at their entwined hands, feeling the pulse of her vampire blood surging through her veins. The darkness inside her stirred, ever hungry, restless. She felt like a pawn on a chessboard, and the pieces were moving whether she was ready or not. The Council of Elders. The journey to the heart of the vampire empire was long, and the air grew colder the closer they got to the Citadel of Night, the ancient seat of the Council of Elders. The citadel was a massive fortress, its black stone walls rising like jagged teeth against the moonlit sky. It was a place of dread and reverence, where the oldest vampires in the world conducted their business. It had been built centuries ago, its halls lined with the skulls and bones of those who had fallen in its wake. Eva felt a chill run down her spine as they entered the citadel, her senses tingling with the ancient magic that pulsed through its very stones. As she stepped into the vast chamber, the council, 12 vampires who had ruled since the dawn of their kind, watched her with cold, calculating eyes. At the center of the room stood Eldrick, the head of the council, an ancient vampire whose power was unmatched. His hair was white as snow, and his eyes were the color of molten gold. He had ruled the council for centuries, his iron will unchallenged. And now, he was looking at Eva as though she were a prize to be claimed. "Eva," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 years. "It is an honor to meet you in person. We've heard much about you." Eva swallowed hard but forced herself to meet his gaze. "I don't want your honor," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want to be a part of your game." Eldrick chuckled darkly, and the other members of the council shared knowing looks. Serafina, the only female member of the council, regarded Eva with an expression of quiet interest, her icy blue eyes betraying no emotion. Eva had heard rumors of Serafina's power, and the way the other vampires spoke of her made Eva uneasy. "You are already a part of this game, whether you wish it or not," Eldrick said. "Your bloodline is the key to a new era. The factions will follow the one who controls you. You are not just a woman, Eva. You are a symbol." Eva's heart pounded in her chest. The realization struck her hard. She was no longer just Eva, she was a political pawn, a symbol of power, a piece in a game she never asked to play. But the council's words were clear, there was no escaping it. Luca, who had been standing at her side, stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We're not here to be pawns in your war. We're here to find a solution. Eva is not a weapon for you to use." Eldrick's eyes flickered with amusement, though his voice remained cold. "We never said she was a weapon, Luca. But make no mistake, she is a force to be reckoned with. And if you do not ally yourself with us, you will both be swept away by the tides of war." The tension in the room thickened. Eva could feel the walls closing in on her, the weight of the council's expectations pressing down on her. They were playing a dangerous game, and she was at the center of it. Serafina's voice broke through the silence. "You must choose, Eva. Align yourself with us, and we will protect you. But if you refuse, well, there are other factions eager to claim what you represent. Some may be less accommodating." Eva's blood ran cold. The threats were thinly veiled, but she could hear them loud and clear. The choice was no longer hers to make. She was caught in the midst of a vampire war, a war that could tear apart everything she held dear. Luca's hand tightened around hers, his presence grounding her, but even he knew the stakes were higher than ever. The path ahead was dangerous. Betrayal was everywhere. And Eva was beginning to realize that the love they shared might not be enough to survive the coming storm. The battle for control. As the night wore on, the meeting with the council ended with no clear resolution. Eva and Luca left the citadel under the watchful eyes of the council's enforcers, but the danger had only just begun. Eva could feel the weight of their decisions bearing down on her. Every step forward was one closer to the heart of the vampire wars. She had been thrust into the middle of a political maelstrom, factions of vampires, each with their own agendas, all vying for control of her. As they made their way back to the mansion, the first waves of conflict began to echo through the vampire world. Whispers of alliances, betrayals, and blood feuds would soon ignite a full-scale war. But one thing was clear, the peace they had fought for was no more. The vampire wars had begun. Chapter 7, Dark Temptations. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie light over the mansion. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with silence. Eva stood in front of a large mirror, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. She could see the changes in herself now, subtle but undeniable. Her eyes gleamed with a faint crimson tint, the edges of her once soft features sharpening. The darkness inside her, the power she had inherited, was stirring, awakening with an insatiable hunger. Every day, the pull became harder to resist. The temptation of power. Eva's training had intensified over the past few weeks. With Luca's help, she had been learning to control her newfound abilities, her heightened senses, her strength, and the dark magic that coursed through her veins. But control was becoming more difficult. The more she tried to suppress it, the stronger the temptation became. She could feel the power inside her like a living thing, a beast that wanted to break free. It whispered to her in the dead of night, urging her to embrace her true potential. "You could have it all," the voice seemed to say. "You could be queen. You could rule them all. They would kneel at your feet." Eva closed her eyes, trying to block out the voice. But it wasn't just her power that was changing her. The darkness was beginning to shift her thoughts, her desires. She found herself drawn to the idea of control, not just over others, but over her own destiny. She wasn't just Eva anymore. She was something more. She was starting to understand what Luca had meant when he said, "Once you accept it, there's no turning back." Luca's growing concern. Luca had always been her rock, her protector. But recently, he had become more distant, more watchful. He had sensed the changes in her, seen how the power was beginning to shape her into someone he no longer recognized. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had once been so human, was slipping away from him. Eva could feel the weight of his gaze on her even when he wasn't in the room. He would watch her from the shadows, his expression unreadable, and she could sense the conflict in him. He loved her, but he was afraid of what she was becoming. And, for the first time, Eva wondered if he was right to be afraid. She had tried to reassure him, to remind him of the love they shared, but something inside her had changed. Something deeper than the love they had once shared. The darkness inside her was becoming more enticing than anything else. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Luca said one evening, as they trained in the garden. His voice was filled with quiet concern. "I don't want you to lose control." Eva's eyes narrowed as she flicked a strand of hair away from her face. "I'm not losing control. I'm finding it," she replied, her tone sharp. She felt the power surge within her, a wild, raw force that made her heart race. She wanted to feel it more, wanted to experience the rush of it, all of it. Luca stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "There's a difference, Eva. There's a line between control and domination. The darkness isn't something you can just wield like a weapon. It will consume you if you let it." Eva hesitated, but only for a moment. "I don't think you understand," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not about control anymore. It's about power, true power. I can feel it, Luca. It's inside me. It's my power." Luca's face darkened, and he reached out to touch her arm, his grip gentle but firm. "You don't have to do this alone. We can fight it together." Eva shook her head, her lips curling into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Maybe I don't want to fight it anymore." The vampire hunters approach. As Eva wrestled with her inner darkness, the vampire hunters were closing in. They had been tracking her for weeks, ever since the council's meeting, and they knew her power would be their key to finally eliminating the vampire threat once and for all. They had prepared for this moment for years, gathering allies, forging weapons, and hunting down every last piece of information about the vampire queen in the making. The hunters weren't just any ordinary humans, they were trained in ancient arts, skilled in combating supernatural beings, and they had a deep, personal hatred for vampires. They had seen the destruction caused by their kind, and they would stop at nothing to wipe them out. Eva had always known they were a threat, but now, she could feel the danger closing in. There was no longer any question of if they would attack, it was a matter of when. The hunters were ready, and the final confrontation was looming. A new ally. Just when Eva's internal struggle seemed like it might tear her apart, a new player entered the game. One evening, as she sat alone in the mansion's library, she felt a presence behind her. The air shifted, and she knew someone was there, but she didn't turn around. The scent was familiar, but it took a moment for her to place it. "Luca," she said, without looking up. But when she turned, it wasn't Luca standing in the doorway. It was Adrian, a vampire she had once known in passing, a mysterious figure with a reputation for playing both sides in the ongoing war between the factions. He had been a rogue, operating outside the traditional vampire hierarchy. Eva had never trusted him, but something about his presence felt different now. His dark eyes locked with hers, and there was a knowing smile on his lips. "I was wondering when I'd find you alone," Adrian said, stepping into the room with a fluid grace. "It's been a while." Eva's gaze sharpened, a surge of suspicion washing over her. "What do you want, Adrian?" "I'm here to offer my assistance," he said, his voice smooth, almost soothing. "The vampire hunters are closing in, and I'm sure you're well aware of the danger they pose. I can help you. I have connections, resources, that can help you defend yourself." Eva studied him carefully, her mind racing. She didn't trust Adrian. His alliances were always shifting, and his motivations were a mystery. But as much as she hated to admit it, he might be her only option. "You're offering to help me, for free?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "What's the catch?" Adrian smiled, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "There's always a catch, Eva. But I assure you, my offer is genuine. The hunters will not stop. And you can't face them alone." Eva felt the weight of the decision hanging over her. She had no choice but to consider his offer. The hunters were getting closer, and her power, still volatile and unpredictable, wasn't enough to guarantee her survival. Not anymore. But what did Adrian really want? Eva's struggle. That night, after Adrian left with a promise to return, Eva sat by the fire in the drawing room, her thoughts swirling. Her mind was torn between the temptations of her growing darkness, her need for power, and the undeniable pull of the love she still felt for Luca. Luca had been trying so hard to protect her, but she could feel herself slipping away from him. She was changing, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop it. The darkness was no longer just a part of her, it was becoming her. She could feel the power in her bones, the pull toward becoming the ruler she had always heard of in ancient stories. The queen. The ruler of vampires. But at what cost? Would she lose Luca? Would she lose herself? Eva placed her hands on her temples, closing her eyes, trying to clear her mind. But the darkness had already begun to consume her thoughts, whispering promises of untold power, control, and the end of all limitations. The question was no longer if she could fight it, but whether she even wanted to. Chapter 8, Breaking Point. The mansion had never felt so cold. Eva sat alone in the darkened room, her back pressed against the cold stone wall as she stared into the flickering flames of the hearth. The fire crackled and popped, but the warmth couldn't seem to reach her. A storm had been raging inside her for days, a tempest of power, temptation, and fear. Her abilities had grown exponentially, and now, they were on the edge of spiraling out of control. Her reflection in the mirror beside her was a distorted version of the person she used to be. Her eyes, once a bright green, had deepened to a dark crimson, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her skin seemed to shimmer with an unnatural pallor, and her veins, visible under the thin skin of her hands, pulsed with a dark energy. Eva could feel the power surging through her, like an endless river ready to burst its banks. Every instinct in her screamed to embrace it, to let it wash over her completely. You could rule. You could be everything they fear and desire. But the price was steep. She could feel it, if she gave in to the prophecy, if she allowed herself to rise as the vampire queen, it would cost her the one thing she had always held dear. Luca. The prophecy looms. The prophecy had always been a distant shadow, a whisper in the back of her mind. But now, it was no longer just a part of her bloodline. It was a living, breathing entity that she couldn't escape. It was in the air she breathed, in the way her heart pounded in her chest. The ancient prophecy foretold that Eva, born of royal vampire blood, would either rise to become the greatest vampire queen to ever live, or she would fall, consumed by darkness, destroying everything in her path. The vampires of the ancient factions, those who had waited for centuries, were closing in. They sensed her power, they could feel it thrumming in her veins. They wanted to control her, claim her, use her to tip the balance of power in their favor. The Council of Elders, with their endless scheming, had already made their move. Adrian, the rogue vampire who had offered his assistance, was lurking in the shadows, his true intentions still unclear. And the hunters, ever relentless, were preparing for their final strike. Everything was closing in on Eva. Her mind raced as she tried to focus. Her thoughts were like shards of glass, sharp, fragmented, impossible to piece together. She was torn between two worlds, the human world she once knew, and the ancient, dangerous world of vampires she was now bound to. The hardest part wasn't the power. It was the choice. Embrace the darkness and become the queen of vampires, or fight it and risk losing everything. She had always believed that love was the most powerful force in the world. She had believed that love was what kept her grounded. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. Was love enough to save her from herself? Could she resist the pull of her destiny, or was she already too far gone? Luca's struggle. Luca had always been her protector, but now, Eva could feel the distance growing between them. It wasn't just the tension of the situation or the constant threats looming over them. It was something deeper. Luca was afraid of what she was becoming. He had always warned her about the dangers of her powers, about the inevitability of the prophecy. But now, his warnings had turned into accusations, his fears into doubts. He was no longer sure that the love they had shared was enough to carry them through this darkness. The storm outside raged as Luca stormed into the room, his face taut with frustration. He stopped short when he saw her, and his eyes softened for a fraction of a second before they hardened again. "Eva," he said, his voice low and strained. "You're pushing yourself too hard. This power, it's changing you." Eva didn't look up from the fire, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. It was too much. Everything was too much. "I can't stop it, Luca," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's who I am now. It's who I was always meant to be." Luca's fists clenched at his sides, and he took a step toward her. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to become this thing. I know what the prophecy says, but you're not that person. You're Eva. You're the woman I love. Not a weapon. Not a queen." Eva turned to face him then, her expression cold, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "You're afraid of me, Luca," she said softly. "You're afraid of what I'm becoming. And you should be. Because I feel it. I can feel the power surging inside me. I'm not the same person anymore." Luca reached out for her, but Eva stepped back, her face hardening. "I need to embrace this," she continued, her voice rising with the growing storm inside her. "I need to be everything I was meant to be. I can't fight it anymore. I won't." Luca's face twisted with pain. "Eva, don't you see? You're losing yourself. The person I love is slipping away. And I can't save you if you don't let me." For a long moment they stood in silence, the air between them thick with the weight of their unspoken words. Luca's heart was breaking, and Eva could feel it. She could feel the pain in his soul, the helplessness in his touch. But it didn't stop the growing darkness inside her from pulling her further away from him. A moment of truth. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Neither of them moved, but Luca's eyes narrowed. He stepped toward the door, his hand resting on the handle. Eva didn't know whether to be relieved or frightened. "Who is it?" Luca called, his voice strained. A voice from the other side responded, cool and calculated. "It's Adrian." Eva's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped she would never have to face him again, but now, it seemed inevitable. Luca shot a glance at her, his expression a mix of wariness and resignation. He opened the door, and Adrian stepped into the room, his dark eyes flickering with something unreadable. "I came to speak with you, Eva," Adrian said, his voice smooth, as though he was talking to a friend rather than an enemy. The time has come for you to make your choice. Eva's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The council is growing impatient, Adrian continued, his tone almost sympathetic. They believe you will join them soon. But there are others, like me, who think you have the power to be more than just a queen. Eva's pulse quickened. And what do you want from me? I'm offering you something that neither Luca nor the council can, Adrian said, stepping closer. The chance to rise above all of them. To claim your destiny, not just as a queen, but as something far greater. Luca stepped forward, his voice tight. You're trying to manipulate her, Adrian. Stay away from her. But Adrian ignored Luca, his gaze fixed entirely on Eva. The question is not whether you can resist the darkness, he said, his voice soft, almost coaxing. It's whether you want to. The breaking point. Eva felt the pull of Adrian's words like a magnet, but at the same time, she felt the pull of Luca's desperate gaze. She was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something irreversible. She could feel the darkness licking at her heels, could feel the power within her swelling to its peak. The time had come. Would she give in and embrace her destiny as the queen of vampires, a force beyond control? Would she rise to power, casting aside her humanity, and let the prophecy unfold? Or would she resist, cling to the love she still felt for Luca, and risk losing everything, her life, her soul, and the one person who mattered most? The room seemed to close in on her as she stood in the center of the storm, torn between two forces, the love she had known and the power she could feel. She could see Luca's pain, hear Adrian's tempting whispers, feel the dark power swirling inside her like a storm that could tear her apart. Eva's heart pounded as she realized that this was her breaking point. The choices she made here would define not only her future but the future of the vampire world. And at that moment, she knew there was no turning back. Chapter 9, The Queen's Choice. The battle had already begun. Eva could feel the weight of it in her bones, the vibrations of the gathering forces shaking the earth beneath her feet. The vampire factions, once divided by age-old rivalries, had set aside their differences for one singular purpose, to either crown her as their queen or destroy her before she could rise to power. Her destiny was no longer a distant whisper. It had become a roaring storm that threatened to consume everything in its path. She stood at the edge of the battlefield, looking out over the ruins of what had once been a peaceful land. The once beautiful landscape was now marred by the remnants of war, burned trees, shattered stone, and blood that had soaked into the earth, turning the soil into something unrecognizable. The Council of Elders had come with their most formidable warriors, their most ancient of bloodlines, each of them believing that Eva was their key to domination. They were the ones who had orchestrated the prophecy, and they had waited centuries for a vampire like her to come into their fold. But there were others, rogues like Adrian, who sought to bend the power to their own desires, and human factions, including the vampire hunters, who saw Eva's rise as the end of humanity itself. Luca was by her side, as always, but there was a distance between them now, a quiet ache that neither of them could ignore. His love for her was unwavering, but it was also clouded by fear. He had never wanted this for her. He had never wanted to see the woman he loved consumed by darkness. Eva's hand rested lightly over her chest, where she could feel the pulse of her power, now stronger than ever. It thrummed through her, resonating with the beat of her heart. She had learned to control it, but only just. The darkness had become a part of her, a constant companion. It whispered to her even now, embrace it. Let it take you. You were born for this. But then, she would look at Luca, his eyes filled with love and pain, and the whispers would fade, replaced by the echo of a simpler truth: I don't want to lose him. The final confrontation. The battlefield was set. The vampire factions had gathered, their ranks towering like a storm cloud, waiting for Eva's command. Her destiny hung in the balance. The council had long anticipated this moment, and they would not back down. If she did not accept their crown, their pact with the other factions would shatter, and the war would rage on until both vampires and humans were decimated. Eva had the power to end the war, to take the throne and unite the factions under her rule. She could wield the darkness as her weapon and become the queen they all feared. But doing so would come at a terrible cost. The prophecy had never promised a future of peace or happiness. It had promised only power, and the price of that power was the destruction of everything she had ever loved. But to reject her destiny, to reject the prophecy, meant betraying everything she had ever known. It meant risking her life, Luca's life, and the lives of countless others. There would be no going back if she chose to walk away from the throne. The factions would never forgive her, the council would hunt her down until there was nothing left of her but ash. The love she shared with Luca would be lost in the flames of war. It was at that moment, standing at the edge of destiny, that Eva understood the full weight of her choice. The choice, power or love. The roar of battle echoed through the night air, the sounds of clashing steel and snarling vampires filling the space between them. Luca stood close, his hand brushing against hers, offering what little comfort he could. His eyes, though filled with pain, were filled with determination as well. Eva, Luca said, his voice soft but urgent, this is the moment. You can still choose. You can reject the prophecy, reject their offer, and we can fight this together. I'll stand by you, no matter what. But Eva could see it in his eyes, the fear. The uncertainty. He was afraid that she would embrace her destiny, afraid of what it would do to her, to them. He didn't understand the power that surged within her, the power she could never deny. The choice between power and love had never seemed so simple and yet so impossible. I am rejecting it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But her heart didn't feel sure. The power inside her was stirring, and it was calling to her like a siren song. It promised to end all of this, to make her invincible, to give her control over the fate of vampires and humans alike. But there was something deeper in her heart, something she couldn't ignore. The love she shared with Luca, the love they had fought for, was stronger than the darkness that threatened to overtake her. And that love was the only thing that could save her. Eva looked over at Luca, her gaze steady. I love you, she said simply, but it was enough. Enough to let him know that, no matter the outcome of this war, no matter what happened, he would always be her anchor. She would never lose sight of that. But just as she made her choice, the wind shifted, carrying with it a cold, foreboding presence. Adrian stepped forward, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. He had been watching them, waiting for the moment when Eva would falter. He could see the battle waging within her, the fight between the darkness and her love for Luca. You think you can escape this, Eva? Adrian's voice cut through the tension, his tone low and insidious. You think you can reject your destiny without consequence? There is no going back from this. The prophecy will consume you, just like it has consumed all those who tried to defy it before. Eva's pulse quickened. The choice had never been so clear. The darkness inside her was speaking to her now, louder than ever. Embrace it. Let it take you. Don't you want to be more than just this? Adrian stepped closer, his presence suffocating. You were born to rule. You were born to be the queen. The darkness is part of you, just as much as the love you feel for Luca. Don't deny it, Eva. You will never be free of it. Eva's breath hitched. For a moment, she was torn. The temptation was so strong, so consuming. Power beyond her wildest dreams. Control. Dominance. The ability to shape the world to her will. But then she looked at Luca, standing beside her. His eyes were filled with quiet resolve, the same love she had always known. The power she felt was real, but it was nothing compared to the love she had for him. Nothing was worth losing that. "I choose love," Eva whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. The wind seemed to still as her decision hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. The consequences of the choice. As soon as the words left her mouth, the darkness inside her surged, fighting against her decision. The storm in her heart raged as the power inside her threatened to break free. The air thickened, swirling around them, as the vampire factions watched in anticipation. But then, something unexpected happened. Eva closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and she pushed the darkness back. For the first time, she controlled it, not with power, but with will. Her love for Luca, her refusal to let it go, was stronger than the temptation of the throne. The darkness retreated, its whispers fading into the distance. And for the first time since her transformation, Eva felt free. Adrian stepped back, his smirk faltering. "You've made a mistake, Eva. But I'll let you live with it. For now." Luca reached out, his hand gently grasping hers. He squeezed it tightly, and for a brief moment, they stood together, the weight of the decision settling over them both. Eva knew there would be consequences, but she also knew that her choice had saved them. The war wasn't over, and their future was still uncertain, but they had each other. And that was enough. The final battle. The vampire factions, seeing Eva's rejection of the prophecy, hesitated. The council and the rogues, furious and confused, faltered. The vampire hunters, having watched the tension unfold, began to advance. The battle was far from over. Eva and Luca stood united, the armies gathering on all sides, ready to clash in the final battle that would determine the fate of both vampires and humans. But now, Eva understood one thing above all else: the true power wasn't in the throne, nor the darkness she had inherited. The true power lay in the choices she made, the choices to love, to fight, and to protect those who mattered most. As the battle raged around them, Eva and Luca fought side by side. Their love was their weapon, and together, they would face whatever came next. Chapter 10: The Final Twist. The wind howled through the desolate landscape, carrying with it the distant echoes of battle. The vampire factions had begun to retreat, scattered in every direction after the decision that had shocked them all, Eva's rejection of the prophecy. But as the dust settled, and the flames of conflict slowly dimmed, a darker truth began to unfold, one that no one had anticipated. Eva stood at the heart of the battlefield, her body trembling from the immense power that coursed through her. Her once vibrant green eyes had turned a deep crimson, glowing faintly under the shadow of her long, dark hair. The power within her, which she had once been able to control, now throbbed painfully beneath her skin. It was becoming too much. Her strength, once a tool to fight, was now a suffocating force, a force that was slowly consuming her, twisting her mind, and threatening her very soul. Luca was beside her, his face pale, his brow furrowed with concern. He could feel the shift in her, the subtle change that had started the moment she had made her choice to reject the throne. He had hoped that in choosing love over power, she would find peace, but instead, it seemed the darkness was growing stronger. "Eva." Luca's voice cracked, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch her arm. "What's happening to you?" Eva's gaze met his, but there was something distant, something cold in her expression. The woman he had loved, the woman who had fought so fiercely to hold on to her humanity, was slipping away. In her place stood something far darker, far more dangerous than he could have imagined. I thought I was rejecting the prophecy," she whispered, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. "But the more I fight it, the stronger it gets." The ground beneath them trembled, a deep, rumbling sound echoing in the distance as if the world itself was reacting to the darkness that was consuming her. The air around Eva seemed to shimmer with unnatural energy, swirling like a vortex, drawing everything into her orbit. Luca's heart ached. He had seen her struggle against the weight of the prophecy, had witnessed her internal battle between the love they shared and the terrifying power she had inherited. But now, it was as if that very love was being eaten away by the force inside her. Eva, no. You're not meant to be like this. I know you're still in there, Luca said, his voice desperate. He stepped closer, grasping her hands, trying to pull her back from the edge. We can find another way. Please, we can still save you. But Eva's eyes, the once warm, vibrant green, now glowed with a dark intensity that sent a chill through Luca's very soul. Luca, Eva's voice was soft, but there was no warmth in it. I'm already lost. The hidden truth of Eva's lineage. As the world around them seemed to hold its breath, a sudden, piercing voice shattered the silence. A figure emerged from the shadows, Adrian, his presence like a dark cloud looming over them. You really thought you could escape it, didn't you, Eva? Adrian's voice was low, almost mocking, as he stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with knowledge that seemed too ancient for his young appearance. Luca's grip on Eva tightened, his instinctive reaction to protect her flaring up. What do you want, Adrian? Adrian's smirk twisted into something darker, more knowing. What I want is irrelevant. What I know is what matters. Eva's brow furrowed, her senses dulled by the growing darkness inside her, but still, something in Adrian's words triggered a deep, gut-wrenching feeling of realization. The prophecy, Adrian continued, his gaze fixed on Eva. It wasn't about your rise to power, or your fall. It was never about whether you would become a queen or a tyrant. The prophecy was always about your transformation, Eva. Your lineage. You are not just the heir to an ancient vampire dynasty, you are the heir to something far older, far darker. Luca's heart skipped a beat, confusion spreading across his features. What do you mean? He demanded, his voice hoarse with fear. Adrian's lips curled into a twisted smile as he took a step closer. You see, Eva, your bloodline doesn't just trace back to the ancient vampire rulers. It traces back to something even older, something beyond the vampires, beyond the human world. You are the descendant of the first blood, the original being who bridged the gap between vampire and human. The first blood is not just a vampire, it is an entity, a force of nature itself. Eva's breath hitched. The words hit her like a hammer. The first blood. You were always meant to become more than just a queen. You were always meant to bring balance to the worlds, to unite the vampire and human realms, or destroy them both. You are the catalyst, Eva. The one who will shape the fate of both worlds, one way or another. Luca's eyes widened as he absorbed the truth. The weight of Adrian's words settled on him, heavy and suffocating. He had known that Eva was important, that her power was something unique, but this was something else entirely. You're saying she's the first blood? Luca asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. The first being who? Adrian nodded. Yes. And with her full awakening, she will either bind both worlds together, or shatter them beyond repair. The power within her, that darkness she has struggled against, is not something she can control. It is part of who she is, part of what she was born to be. The true test, love or sacrifice. Eva staggered, the revelation crashing through her like a tidal wave. She had never known the full extent of her lineage, had never understood the true weight of the prophecy. She had always fought against it, thinking that rejecting it would free her from the darkness. But now she realized that the prophecy was never something to be fought, it was something that had been woven into her very being from the moment of her creation. Her heart pounded in her chest, the struggle intensifying as the darkness surged within her. You can't stop it. You were born for this. You are the first blood. Luca stepped forward, his face desperate and broken. Eva, listen to me. You can fight this. You are not the first blood. You are you, you are the woman I love. I won't lose you to this. Eva looked at him, her eyes a mixture of pain and sorrow. I don't want to hurt you, Luca. But I don't know how much longer I can hold on. This power, it's too much. I can't stop it. Luca reached for her, his hand trembling as he cupped her face, his thumb gently brushing away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. Then let me help you. Let me be your anchor. I won't let you become this thing. I love you too much. But the power inside her roared in response, and Eva's eyes flickered with an eerie glow. The darkness surged, consuming her with its weight. A painful gasp escaped her lips as she fought to control it, to keep herself grounded. Adrian's voice broke through the chaos. The choice is simple, Luca. You can let her continue down this path and risk her becoming the very force that will destroy both our worlds, or you can destroy her now and end the nightmare before it begins. Luca's breath hitched. His mind raced. He had never thought that the day would come when he would have to make this decision, to save her or to destroy her. He could see the pain in Eva's eyes, could feel her struggle against the pull of the darkness. He had never wanted to be her savior, he had only ever wanted to be by her side, to fight alongside her. But now, the fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and the weight of the decision crushed him. He turned to Adrian. I won't kill her, Luca said, his voice filled with unwavering determination. I won't choose that path. I will fight for her, whatever it takes. Adrian laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. Then prepare yourself for the consequences, Luca. There's no escaping what's coming. You've made your choice. As Adrian's figure faded into the shadows, the ground beneath them cracked open, and the air grew thick with the raw power of Eva's transformation. The battle was far from over. And in that final, heartbreaking moment, Luca knew that everything had changed. Eva was no longer just the woman he loved. She was a force, one that would shape the future of both vampires and humans. But would that future be one of salvation or destruction?